There's no more for that.
It's a good ball. The flag stays down. Healy!
Good evening and welcome to Let's Talk. Tonight we have the perfect balance on our panel between distinguished political veterans and youthful rising stars. Albert Reynolds was the Republic's Taoiseach from 1992 until 1994 and was widely credited with playing an influential role in the early stages of the peace process alongside John Major. Edwin Poots is a DUP Assembly member for Lagan Valley and is due to become the new Minister for Culture, Arts and Leisure at Stormont next month. John O'Dowd is a Sinn Féin MLA for Upper Bann and the leader of his party's Assembly Group. He's just been appointed chairman of the Stormont Public Accounts Committee. Jim Allister became an independent member of the European Parliament when he recently resigned from the DUP over the party's decision to go into government with Sinn Féin. And finally, Sir Kenneth Bloomfield is a former head of the Northern Ireland Civil Service. He was secretary to the failed power-sharing executive in 1974 and is currently the Commissioner for the Location of Victims' Remains. Now, tonight's questions have, as ever, been chosen by our studio audience, but you can also have your say at home. You can phone and text your comments throughout the show, and details of how you can take part are on your screen now. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's Let's Talk panel. So our first question this evening comes from Rosemary Rainey, who's an education consultant from Belfast. Rosemary.
Panellist, should anyone compromise his or her principles for the sake of the peace process?
Right. Should anyone compromise his or her principles for the sake of the peace process? Edwin Poots, have you compromised any principles in the pursuit of peace?
I don't believe that we've compromised basic principles, and the basic principles that we espoused are the basic principles of democracy, the principles of upholding the rule of law, and the principles that everyone's vote is equal. And certainly one of the issues that we had after the 1998 agreement was that everyone's vote weren't equal, that some people's votes were accounted for more than others. And ultimately to deal with that situation and to lance that boil as such, we did have to go through the process of insisting that decommissioning took place, insisting on the acceptance of policing and the rule of law by other parties, and indeed introducing into the Assembly now accountability, which we didn't have before. So ministers cannot act as independent fiefdoms within their departments, but they do have to have the authority of the Assembly to carry out their decisions.
Did the DUP compromise at all? Did compromise cease to become a dirty word for your party in the negotiations that led up to the deal that will see devolution restored on the 8th of May?
Certainly there was decisions taken which moved in terms of where the DUP were. But ultimately, the basic principles of democracy is what we were espousing then, and it's what we are still holding to. And I don't believe that we compromised those basic principles.
Jim Allister, is that how you see it? Do you think that the DUP, a party which you were a member of, did compromise its principles for the sake of peace?
It's because they did that I'm no longer a member of the DUP. The DUP fought the election on a very clear situation, that there had to be upfront delivery by Sinn Féin in terms of irreversible commitment to the democratic process and support for the rule of law and everything else. Not once but 5 times was that pledge made in the manifesto. And what we then settled for was no further delivery whatsoever. What we settled for was an attitude by Sinn Féin on policing which is cherry picking, which creates this nonsense of so-called civic policing. There's no such thing, there's just policing. Either you support it or you don't, and yet what we've settled for is a policy where Sinn Féin MPs like Ms Gildringhue can come out and condemn the lawful arrest and the charging of 2 men with attempted murder, where they can continue to withhold the information they have about the murder of Robert McCartney, where they can choose and pick as to what aspects of policing they will support.
But
and also
Jim,
where they can cling to an army council.
Yep.
And an army council, of course, is the very antithesis of democracy, because it is the apex of terrorism, the apex of military structures, of terrorist structures, and sadly the DUP agreed, despite a manifesto that said there had to be an end to all terrorist structures. The DUP has agreed to going into government with Sinn Féin, not knowing and maybe not caring whether in that government there sit men who were and maybe still are members of the Army Council of the IRA.
But
the Army Council which sanctioned every atrocity in this province and every act of genocide that we suffered.
Right.
And that to me is a breach of principle too far, and that's why I am no longer in the DUP.
Although the difficulty for you is that, and Edwin Poots will disagree with a lot of what you've said, but whether you're right or wrong is a bit of a side issue, because the vast majority of people in Northern Ireland clearly don't agree with you. Not to downplay some of the issues that you've talked about, but they are, with the greatest respect, largely minutiae in the margins, because people seem to be more focused on the greater good, as they say.
Minutiae? Whether or not you might have sitting as your Deputy First Minister someone who continues, or at least in the recent past was, a member of an illegal army council, of an illegal army.
Yeah, but
that's
the thing is,
minutiae. Tell me what could be of greater significance to the wholesomeness of the democratic process. There is nothing. But the problem for Edwin Poots is that Edwin Poots believed what I believed until it became politically expedient not to do so. And you make the point, whether or not it is popular is neither here nor there.
Okay.
Principles matter, and those principles matter to me.
Well, I'll come on to other panellists in a second, but Edwin, just come back on that briefly.
Well, Jim refers to cherry picking, and of course at the outset, whenever Jim first started to complain, he indicated that we didn't have the issues tied down. And in terms of the oath, whenever the oath is taken, there's nothing in it about civic policing. It's about policing and the rule of law. No civic policing is mentioned. It is in policing in its entirety. So Sinn Féin have to sign up to policing in its entirety under the oath that will be taken in the House.
It's not an oath.
So whether Jim likes it or not, that's a fact.
So let's be correct. It's not an oath. It's a pledge. And the first person, the Deputy First Minister, will take it. He also took another pledge. And that was the pledge when he joined the IRA. And when he went to the Savile inquiry to give evidence, he took refuge in that and said, I cannot breach my Republican code of honour. So which pledge is Mr McGuinness going to be most bound by? His pledge when he joined the IRA, or his pledge when he joins the executive?
Well, is Jim going to suggest is he never going into government with Sinn Féin? Because that isn't the position that he took within the party.
No, sorry, I'm very clear.
He indicated within meetings in the party that he was prepared to do it. It was time scale that he was concerned about.
Yes.
So whilst we were going in the early summer, Jim was prepared to go in the late summer.
That is not correct.
Yes.
I have always
September, October is the late part of the summer, early autumn.
That parties can make the transition from terrorist supporters to supporters of democracy. Albert Reynolds' party is an example. Fianna Fáil started out in the early days, terrorist related. Workers' Party is an example. But it is something that takes time to be proven over time that it is genuine.
And what we were talking about, the difference was 3 months, Jim.
No, sorry, we're not talking.
Okay, well, look, I don't want to get bogged down in a debate that's already.
I have never said.
The issues that was raised within the party officers' meetings, Jim, and you were talking about 3 or 4 months difference from where we are now.
That is not correct. And you know that not to be correct. And it's a fig leaf that you're trying to hide behind.
That is correct,
and what you're hiding is the fact that though you said, and every other party officer said, that there would have to be a testing over a credible period, and we wouldn't be calendar led, suddenly we set our calendar, suddenly we are calendar led, suddenly the conditions are out the window, and suddenly it's as fast as we can get to dash into government with Sinn Féin without them delivering all the things that were required to be delivered. Now, I can understand the embarrassment, I can understand the desire to divert, but the fundamentals are perfectly clear. The DUP, alas, did no better than the Ulster Unionist Party in terms of abandoning its election commitments.
Okay, so there's been nothing happening in the past 6 weeks.
Absolutely no delivery in the last 6 weeks. Where has there been further delivery? Has there been a recantation by Ms Gildernew that people should now, if they find weapons reported?
My point was maybe the debate has moved on, Jim. Maybe the debate has simply moved on. People don't seem to care enough to have weighed in behind your view.
Well, and if I'm the only person that cares, I will still care.
Yeah.
Because I meet in my work a lot of people who were made victims by the organisation that is the Republican movement.
Yeah.
And they care.
Yes,
and
there
I
are
care.
also,
and the DUP wants
absolutely,
care.
and Sir Kenneth can talk about victims as well, and one certainly would not wish to downplay what you're saying, but you also hear on the media victims who say, we have to leave the past behind us. We don't forget about it, but we have to move on.
Yes,
we have to compromise, they say.
We have to move on a basis which is sustainable.
Will
Yes,
you allow me
Ken,
to intervene in
please.
this party political broadcast? I have indeed spent a number of years dealing with the problem of the victims. In a sense, I was a victim myself. The IRA tried to assassinate me, and in the immediate aftermath, the Belfast Brigade of the IRA said this was to warn civil servants not to become tools of the British military machine. I mean, nonsense, because what I was actually involved in at the time was trying to improve the conditions of life in North and West Belfast. But we've got to move on.
Have they ever said they regret it?
Please, would you let somebody else speak for a moment, if I may say so? I'm the odd man out here. I'm not a politician. I've never been a politician. I don't want to be a politician. But I'm a representative of the biggest party of all. I'm a representative of the governed. And I think the lady's asked a very telling question. I think one should be very shy about abandoning principle. Policy is a different matter. I actually witnessed in 1973-4 the difficulties of operating a coalition government, particularly a coalition government brought together by rather artificial means. And what tends to happen is that the people sitting around the cabinet table do realise over time that to make it work, they've got to make concessions. They can't have 100% of what they've always stood for. You then get out onto the back bench, and already their backbenchers are saying, oh my goodness, why are you boys doing that? That's never been our policy. And then when you get out to the wee holes around the countryside, it's still more difficult. So this constitution, which is now coming into force, is not going to be easy to operate. I'm happy, you're not happy, but I'm happy that it's a beginning, but it is only a beginning. The proof of the pudding will be in the eating. And I look back to the Government of Ireland Act 1920, which was our original constitution, and it's talked of peace, order and good government. We've certainly moved towards peace and order. Will this be capable of providing stable, enduring, fair and effective government? That's the question that remains to be answered here.
Okay, interesting perspective indeed. Ken, thank you very much for that. John O'Dowd, it's not just an issue, the question of principle is not just an issue clearly for unionists. I mean, there are those within the broader Republican family who would say that Sinn Féin, John O'Dowd has compromised on his principles in reaching this agreement. How do you answer that charge?
Well, firstly, let me touch on the previous conversation that took place. Jim is missing the point about when Sinn Féin should enter government. Sinn Féin should enter government when enough people vote for it to enter government. And that's exactly what happened. Now, Jim may not like that, and I personally don't care if he likes it or not, but that's the fact of the matter. Sinn Féin went out, sought mandate, got the mandate, and we're now in government. So it's not on Jim's permission or anyone else's, Edwin's permission or anyone else's. It's on our mandate. In relation to abandoning principles for the benefit of a peace process, what you have to do within a peace process and within conflict resolution is to search deep inside yourself and to see how you can move the situation on. And there is points where you may reach a certain area of principle that you can't go beyond. But you have to understand the difference between principles and tactics. So it is. And that's, I think, where people who would be opposed to Sinn Féin's point of view on the Republican side or the broader nationalist side, I think have got it wrong, because they believe that the tactic of armed struggle is the principle of a united Ireland. It's not. Time has moved on, politics has moved on in this island, and I believe firmly, as an Irish Republican, that Sinn Féin, continuing on its present strategy, will deliver United Ireland.
But you've also compromised. You've compromised
Certainly
on...
compromised.
You've compromised on British withdrawal, you've
No, we haven't
compromised
compromised
on
on British
policing.
withdrawal.
Well,
every meeting and every objective of Sinn Féin and what we are about is ending British government rule in Ireland. Because I'm careful, because
you're about to go up and implement it at Stormont. I mean, that's the reality.
I'm about to implement...
And you're now calling on young Republicans to join a British police force.
Hold on. What I'm about to implement, along with my Sinn Féin colleagues, is a mandate elected by people in the north of Ireland. So I am going to use that mandate to the best of my ability to serve all the people of the north of Ireland. So I am. To the best of our ability. In relation to what we're about, Sinn Féin's strategy, and it's no secret, is about the reunification of Ireland.
Yes.
Edwin is clearly opposed to that, and others are
Clearly,
clearly opposed
it's
to that.
quite far down the line, because whenever you go into government on May the 8th, you're not taking a
Mark,
step towards a united Ireland.
Mark, I have sat in many a TV studio and radio studio with yourself and other journalists who have told me that Sinn Féin's strategy going towards a number of things will never happen. You told us that the DUP would never talk to us. They're talking to us. We're going into government with them.
I don't know if I personally ever told you that. I'm not sure that I was in a position to tell you that.
Okay, maybe I'm being unfair. I'm sure some of your journalistic colleagues have.
It's your perspective on what it is that you're trying to achieve. But you know, the reality as well is that Edwin Poots isn't going into government with you on May the 8th to help you get a united Ireland.
Of course he's not.
He's doing it because he thinks he's moving you away from getting a united Ireland.
It's a British institution supporting a British police force.
Well, if you let me answer the question, it'll help.
Right.
Edwin is perfectly in his rights to do that, but the Good Friday Agreement is about those who can persuade the majority of people on the way forward. Our view is that we can persuade the majority of people on the way forward towards united Ireland. If Edwin believes different, and he obviously does believe different, that's fair enough.
Okay, right. I want to come to Albert Reynolds now, former Taoiseach, someone who's been involved in this whole process for such a long period of time and also been an observer of that process for so many years. What do you make of the notion of compromise generally and the notion of compromise specifically in Northern Ireland at the moment?
I think anybody in politics today or any other day that expects to get 100% of what they want will never get it. All of us in politics have to take less along the way for the general good, because we're all servants to the people out there who vote and put us in. And when I came to be leader of my party and Taoiseach of the country, I felt that the two big issues facing it, insofar as the people were concerned, was, first of all, peace in Northern Ireland. I put number one, and number two was to grow the economy, to try and stop the immigration and to get the whole economy going. And I went to Europe in relation to getting the seed capital to start that part of it. And I came up here and I spoke to an awful lot of people, and the ordinary people on both sides. I'm not here to make any judgment on either side as to what. That's for the people up here to decide who they want to represent them. But all I wanted was peace. And I said, that's what I was going to go for. And I went for it. And I found that the more I spoke to the political people up here, I wasn't getting anywhere in relation to trying to get ceasefires. So I had to make up my mind, if I'm going to go for peace, I'm going to have to do it in not the ordinary way of doing it.
And did it involve compromise on your part?
It did.
In what way, in what tangible way did you have to compromise?
Well, first of all, when I realised that the politics wasn't going to deliver peace, I had to go to the people who could deliver peace on both sides. And I had a meeting with the late David Irvine, what do you call him?
Gusty Spence.
Gusty Spence, and a few more, but they were representative of the combined Loyalist military command. And to cut a long story short, I put politics off the table. And I said, I want peace and I want to stop people being shot from both communities up here. What can I do to do it? And they said, the only thing we are asking you to do is, because we don't believe in the IRA stopping, our people don't believe in it, do you? And I says, I'll try. What do I have to get? Cut a long story short, that meeting was in Dublin. Nobody ever knew they went down. You didn't know till tonight till I told you. And I didn't tell anybody, because I had to keep the trust. I had to get the trust first of the people that were involved and keep the trust. And the only way to do it was do it myself. No security, no nothing, me. And I didn't even tell the members of my cabinet in case it would get out, because I realised that their lives could be at stake. And consequently, I left the second meeting in the Shankill Road, and we had an arrangement that if I got the IRA to do a ceasefire for 6 weeks, they would do a ceasefire for good. I don't know how many people know that, but it worked. And on the day that the IRA produced their ceasefire, everybody laughed at me. They said it wouldn't happen, it wouldn't succeed, everything like that. I says, I took it all. And I was, myself and my wife at one stage was said that the only people believed in what I was doing. I'm a proud man today, and so is my family as well, that it's there. But I'm not here except to say that I delivered what I said I'd deliver, and the people, I believe, they're delighted with what they got, and it's up to the politicians to take it from here.
Okay. Albert, thank you very much indeed for that. Let's come back to Rosemary. You asked the question, and what a series of answers that question produced. What do you make of what you've heard so far?
I'm very pleased with Sir Kenneth Bloomfield's response. I find that I have an affinity with it. From my own perspective, I would not want to compromise my principles. But having said that, I recognise that faced with polarised positions, there has to be, using the words of the television PE person, there has to be bend and stretch for the greater good of the greater number. And I would be therefore prepared to do that. The overriding factor for me is I would ask myself this question: how can I love my neighbour if I deny my neighbour peace, progress, and hopefully prosperity?
Anybody else want to come in? Yeah, gentleman over here. Yeah.
There's an election coming up in the Republic of Ireland, and the main parties down there will not compromise. They have all said they will not take Sinn Féin IRA in with them should a coalition be required. I think Mr Reynolds was of the same opinion. When he was Taoiseach, he would not have said Sinn Féin IRA.
It's an interesting point. Just a brief question about that, Mr Reynolds. Fianna Fáil officially says it wouldn't go into coalition government with Sinn Féin in the Republic, but yet is very supportive of unionists doing it, very keen to put pressure on unions to do it up here in the north. I mean, a brief thought on that?
Well, I know that there's a bit of contradiction there where it's okay in one part of the country and it's not okay in the other part of the country. But my experience in politics tells you that people say everything before elections, and it's only when the result is on the table that they make up their mind as to what they're going to do. And I think anything else I would say wouldn't be true.
Right.
The other important factor Mark, is
let me just tease this out. Are you saying that when Bertie Ahern says he won't go into government with Sinn Féin, Bertie might not be telling the full truth?
Well, in my life in politics, I've seen it a few times. I disagreed with it myself in relation to other parties that were brought in over the last 25 years. And, you know, you have to look at what the result, that the people turn up and make the best of it. Okay. Anybody that thinks that you can go and do what you want to do and ignore the people, they won't last long in politics.
The important part of that, and you have to understand, is Sinn Féin hasn't asked Fianna Fáil to go into government with them either.
Yeah.
So we haven't.
You're not telling me now that Sinn Féin wouldn't like to be in government.
Yes, but it's not up to Fianna Fáil to turn around and say we won't share power with Sinn Féin. Sinn Féin hasn't asked them.
Yes.
The present position with Fianna Fáil is that they have said they're not going into a position. But what I'm saying is this: when the numbers are on the table, you have to look at them, and the people expect you to present a government.
Jim, did you want to say something briefly?
I just want to say this, that Fianna Fáil have the position. Of course, some others had a position that certain things would happen in that regard over dead bodies. And we saw how long that lasted in terms of a willingness to compromise, if that's the N word, and to change the policy.
In terms of the motion that was passed by Sinn Féin, it's very interesting. And the Constitution of Ireland would have to change to allow Sinn Féin currently into government. But the motion that was put by Gerry Adams to the Irish would actually allow the disbandment of the IRA to move into government in the Irish Republic without having to go back to the Irish. And I think that's very interesting. And perhaps the only function remaining for the dormant IRA Army Council will be the disbandment of the IRA.
Right. Ken, you just a quick word and then I want to go to the next question.
Could I go back to what Albert Reynolds has said? You did mention my recent book.
It's very good, Ken. You've waited 20 minutes before you did that. Very impressive.
What I've tried to do in that, though, is to analyse an enormous number of government documents over many, many years. And I say in it, and I'm happy to say this to the face of Albert Reynolds, that I thought the Downing Street Declaration between himself and John Major was the best and most honest and most fair document of the whole period of the Troubles. Nearly every other document, both documents prior to that and documents subsequent to that, I would criticise on one ground or another. I thought that was an attempt to strike a really fair balance, and I would like to congratulate Albert Reynolds now in his participation. I mean, I think Albert Reynolds and John Major are underestimated in all of this. I mean, people behave as if all of this is Tony Blair's doing. Major was the first Prime Minister to regard the Northern Ireland problem as a huge national priority and to devote real time and attention to it. And I think he deserves very real credit for that. He tends to be a forgotten man, but he cared about Northern Ireland, he cared about it deeply, and he deserves credit for that.
Okay. So Kenneth, thanks very much indeed, and I'm sure Albert Reynolds is happy to accept that particular laurel.
Absolutely.
Okay. Let's move on.
Stop people being killed was the big question that was in my mind.
Okay.
And I'm
Let's
happy
move
that
on.
that's just stopped.
Let's move on to the next question tonight. It comes from Michael Keelty, who's a student from Strabane. Michael.
How do you feel about the possibility of the Loyal Orders marching down the Garvaghey Road this summer?
Okay, well, the question of parades very much in the agenda. We had a new review announced yesterday under Lord Ashdown. What do you think about Garvaghey Road? It's your constituency, isn't it, John O'Dowd? Possibility?
Well,
on the table?
There's not a possibility on the table as yet. There's all sorts of speculation around the reasons why Brendan McConaughey left Sinn Féin, and within media rooms, when it was a quiet media, they decided that it was connected to some sort of deal between Sinn Féin and the DUP. It's complete and utter rubbish. Sinn Féin cannot deliver a parade down the Garvaghey Road, even if we wanted to, and we don't want to. The parade going down the Garvaghey Road was stopped by the people of the Garvaghey Road, and Sinn Féin supported them in that. Now, the only way there's going to be a resolution to the Garvaghey Road issue, and some people believe the issue already has been resolved, is between direct dialogue between the people of the Garvaghey Road and the Orange Order. So all this speculation that there's some deal in the background over the Irish Language Act and a march down the Garvaghey Road is complete and utter rubbish.
So has it been discussed or not?
In terms of the Loyal Order marches, has been discussed, and of course it should have been discussed between ourselves and the DUP, but getting down into detail of where marches can and cannot take place is not a matter for Sinn Féin, and it's not a matter for the DUP.
Yeah.
It's a matter between residents and the marching orders.
But the interesting point surely is that there has been a political movement now, a political shift, which might make it possible for there to be a resolution to the Drumcree situation.
Well, I would hope in this new political atmosphere that the Orange Order drop their ridiculous stance of not speaking to resident spokespersons, and that they do enter into dialogue with Brendan McConaughey and the other Garvaghey Road residents. What the outcome of that discussion is, no one knows, and in my opinion, no march is as legitimate an outcome as a march.
Okay, just a thought from you on Edwin Poots. You're going to be Minister for Culture, Arts and Leisure. I mean, some in the media are suggesting there could be some kind of deal here where there's a parade down the Garvaghey Road in return for you taking a slightly softer view on the creation of an Irish Language Act or the introduction of such an act.
Well, nobody in the party has mentioned it to me in the first instance, so I don't believe that there's been any negotiations going on in that respect, and I think that a lot of it is media hype. But the parades issue does have to be resolved. There's only about 25 contentious parades out of around 3,000 parades in Northern Ireland, and ultimately they cause huge problems. And if we as a society in Northern Ireland are to move on, we're going to have to get over this particular issue. We're going to have to learn to respect each other's views. There's a culture out there, it's an orange culture. Some people don't understand it, some people don't like it, but it's very important to others. And I think it is important that that is recognised, that people are allowed to practice their culture, even if others don't understand it, and allow society to move on.
Okay, Sir Ken?
I tend to agree with the notion that any solution to the immediate problem of the Garvaghey Road will have to be a local solution. I don't think it can be parachuted down on top of the community there. But can I say to the politicians who have been elected by the people, and we must respect their mandate, I think they should be giving very simple advice to this community, or at any rate to that part of the community they're closest to, and they should be saying, try not to offend people, and equally, try not to go out of your way to be offended. I mean, a degree of mutual tolerance as a matter of principle would be something I think that should be commended to the people of Northern Ireland, to be more tolerant of each other, not to give offence, but not so easily to take offence. I think that would do a power of good.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, do just hear the thoughts of Michael before we hear from our other panellists.
Personally, I would disagree wholeheartedly with Mr. O'Dowd. I think that in this society of mutual respect, I think it's important that we try and work out our differences, whether it be by disregarding our own personal feelings or trying to work together.
But what did I say that you felt that I have said that we should try to work out our differences, or we shouldn't try and build a basis on mutual respect? What did I say that makes you believe that?
You talk a lot about this deal for the Irish Language Act, regardless of whether there is any deal on the table.
There is no deal around the Irish Language Act.
That's what I said, regardless of whether there is or not. I think it's very important that on a local level we try and work out our differences.
And I agree, and that local level needs to be between the Orange Order and the people who are affected by parades. So those are the people who are affected by parades, the marching orders and those people who live in the areas where they march through. And what I'm saying is those two groups need to sit down with each other, across the table and work out a resolution to it.
Okay, right, thank you very much. There's a lady just over on my right here, yeah.
Mr. O'Dowd, you said originally that the residents of the Garvaghy Road opposed the march, the parade down, and you said Sinn Féin supported them in their protest. What I would like to know now is that would you now encourage them and give them support to compromise, as other politicians have done to get where we are today with regard to the Assembly? So instead of giving them the support to oppose the parade, can you now tell me, would you give them their support to compromise with the Orange Order?
The residents' groups have always made it clear that they are prepared to enter dialogue without any predetermined outcomes around the parades issue. So as politicians have learned, and as society has learned, once you enter a process of dialogue, what the outcome of that is, no one can tell. So I think the position where the residents are coming from is a positive one, and I hope that the Orange Order reaches that position as well. So I'm not saying once the residents sit down to the Orange Order there has to be A, B, C or D happen. I'm saying let those two bodies work it out and agree what happens at the end of that process.
Right, and so they're going to negotiations, and you'd be quite happy to encourage residents to consider the possibility that the outcome might well be an orange parade down the Garvaghy Road.
I think the residents are wise enough and have been through enough to realise that may be an outcome of the talks.
Right.
I suppose whenever you see a paddy wagon, people will be wondering whether Mr. Ashton's inside it.
Jim?
It really is, I have to say, so much cant and hypocrisy for Sinn Féin to pretend that the residents' attitude to parades is nothing to do with them. Everybody knows that it was Sinn Féin that orchestrated, as part of a phase and a strategy of theirs, to stir up insurrection against parades, to cause civil disorder in respect of parades.
So you just don't believe John O'Dowd when he says that's not the case?
When John O'Dowd says it's not the case, he flies in the face of what everyone knows and what was in a leaked Sinn Féin document of about 10 years ago, which indicated that that was a new phase of their struggle.
Right.
They've made it a cause celeb, and they can equally resolve it if they were so minded.
Right. So are you saying if they turn...
This is a one-way process, and they do not want to resolve it.
All right, so you're saying if they were able to turn the tap on, they could turn it off just as easily. Right. Well, John O'Dowd...
I wish I was all-knowing, so principled and self-righteous as Jim Allister is. Sure, wouldn't the world be perfect? So it would. But unfortunately, Jim, that isn't the way the world works. And everybody doesn't know, because I don't know. So that's one person who doesn't know. The fact of the matter is, it's disrespectful to the communities who have been affected by marches to turn around and say that Sinn Féin tells them what to do and what not to do. They are very capable, intelligent people who have been through their experiences themselves. They know what it's about. It's up to those people to make the decisions.
But there's another critical issue. Will Sinn Féin, if there is a decision that the Garvaghy Road parade should go ahead, will Sinn Féin support the police in policing that? Is that what they're going to do this July if that's the decision?
I'm not going to go through hypothetical questions with Jim Allister.
Well, it's a very interesting question.
It is a possibility? We could go through them all night, so I could throw some hypothetical questions back to Jim. It would be a very interesting programme.
It may be hypothetical, but I think it's a fair question.
I think what a fair point is that Sinn Féin is encouraging people to enter dialogue to resolve the issue. And I think that's the important way to go, and that's the way people should be using their energies, instead of what Jim has set out to do, to find problems the whole way down the road. And it's no longer even finding problems so that Sinn Féin will trip over them. He's trying to find problems so his former DUP colleagues will trip over them.
And that would be a big difficulty for Sinn Féin, would it, if you had to make that choice, if you had to call that one between the residents on one side and your newfound support for the PSNI on the other?
As I said, I'm not getting into hypothetical questions on the issue.
Well, it would be difficult.
So I'm not getting into hypothetical questions on the issue.
Albert.
I think, well, first of all, I'm reading the papers and I can't find anybody who can tell me that the various stories in the papers have any basis at all for announcement, that there's nothing there at the moment except a proposal. Now, there is, as I see it as an outsider now, there is a committee there for the last 11 years trying to solve all these things. And I agree with all of them that said it's up to the two communities to come together and sort it out. And some of the questions that you've been raising here, if the two communities can sort it out themselves, the other questions will never arise. And I believe you're in a new start here. You have a new government going in on the 8th of May, and I believe that if they come together in offering a solution, but I would prefer to see the two communities getting together, solve it, and that it'll be solved for all time.
Okay, thank you. I see a few hands up in the audience. Gentleman just there, yeah.
How can it be a resolution to this issue if one side refuses to talk to the other? And I'm throwing here the Orange Order refusing to meet the residents of the Garvaghy Road.
Well, is that still the position of the Orange Order? I mean, it is still the position as far as Garvaghy Road is concerned.
They won't speak, and it's not up to me to speak for the Orange Order, but my understanding is they definitely won't speak to the Garvaghy Road residents, and they won't even speak to the Parades Commission. They wouldn't speak to me as an elected representative of the community either.
Right. Edwin Poots, would you be encouraging the loyal orders now to speak to anybody who needs to be spoken to? I mean, has the political landscape changed to such an extent that it's hard to sustain the not talking scenario?
The policy of the Orange Order is that they're entitled to walk the Queen's Highway, and therefore they don't need to be asking permission of particular groups for something which isn't an alienable right. And that is a reasonable policy. It's a consistent policy.
It's fine in theory, but it doesn't work. I mean, if that was the case, we wouldn't have had a standoff for years.
I can't dictate the Orange Order what they should do.
No, but you're a political leader. You're going to be in the new government. You're a rising star of the DUP. You could say you think maybe the time has come for a rethink.
No, I personally think that the Orange Order have been right in the stance that they have taken. I think that the residents' groups on very many occasions have stirred things up which didn't actually exist. And particularly in relation to the Portadown parade, it wasn't a parade which was involved with a lot of bands and hangers-on. It was a Sunday parade. And I think that it was an act by Sinn Féin in particular that brought about the situation that we have in Portadown. I can understand in other areas where you perhaps have a lot of people who are hangers-on, who aren't Orange men, who aren't belonging to the bands, that create problems. That's a different scenario. But the Orange men shouldn't essentially have to ask permission to do something which is a cultural right.
Okay, anybody else want to come in on this one? Yes, gentlemen, just at the back. I'll come back to you in a second.
We all in this community have seen trouble and strife, and we're hearing the same old rhetoric from the people who are accepting money from the British government to form a government in this country to govern us and act upon our wishes. And realistically, these people should be following a lead and saying, let's move forward. Let's compromise. Let's learn to live together in peace, in love and harmony. Why can the elected representatives sit and deliver to the people at home the same old rhetoric? The button on the television will be changed channel or the TV will be turned off. Everybody out there wants to have peace, and I'll say it again, love and harmony. And it's a talk about a march down a road. 5 minutes, it's over. Make a cup of tea, look out the window, read the paper. We all move on. We have to accept, as was said from one of the panellists earlier on, we have to accept and respect each other's position.
And so both sides should talk as far as Garvaghy Road is concerned, in your view. Although, I mean, you've criticised the politicians there. I mean, they have moved on. They have agreed to go into government on May the 8th. Would you give them credit for that?
I'm giving them credit for the acting on behalf of the people that elected, and they're carrying out what the majority of people of every tradition in this country want. And that is the right to work, the right to live, and the right to enjoy a beautiful country.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. Anybody else want to come in? Just let me come back to the man in front again. Sorry, you raised the earlier question.
I don't see it as an issue of opposing somebody's culture. It's a fact that the Orange Order refuses to accept what the Garvaghy Road residents, their opposition to it, you know what I mean? And because of their refusal to actually negotiate or even speak or acknowledge them people, that the whole thing has been down to a stalemate for 10 years.
Okay.
In terms of negotiation, the Orange Order were prepared to walk down without bans, without flags, without anything else. So, what is the issue that there's, 700, 800 people walk from church into Portadown? What is the big issue?
Well, my recollection of one agreement was that after that agreement was made, your party leader danced down the road with David Trimble. You know what I mean?
Oh.
After that parade was allowed to go down.
So people aren't allowed to celebrate and enjoy
Well,
things?
I mean, it wasn't a celebration. It was like a coat trail, actually.
But there needs to be compromise on both sides.
Oh yeah,
does there
I
not?
agree with that. But how can you have compromise if you don't have dialogue?
Yeah.
And the Orange Order refused to talk.
Well, let's see what happens in the next few weeks. Okay, thanks. Interesting question. Just before we move on to the next question, worth reminding you that we do want to hear your views at home. Of course, you can phone and text your comments throughout the programme. Details are appearing on the screen now. We're very keen to hear what you make of it if you're watching us at home. The next question tonight comes from Philip Allen, who's a gardener from Belfast. Philip.
Should Tony Blair's legacy be seen as one of bringing peace to Northern Ireland or bringing war to Iraq?
Well, people are talking a lot about Tony Blair's legacy at the moment, aren't they? Because he's in his final few weeks in number 10. Sir Ken?
I am one of those, perhaps many people, who have very mixed feelings about Mr. Blair. I think on the one hand, the country seldom had as articulate, as intelligent, as shrewd a Prime Minister. I think he has devoted a great deal of time and effort to the Northern Ireland situation. I think Iraq has been a total disaster. I mean, I have a sense of grief when I turn on my television these days, when on top of all those kids killed in the State University in America, you see more carnage in Baghdad. I mean, that's been a terrible error. I worry about one aspect of his involvement here. I mean, frankly, I'm one of those who voted for the Good Friday Agreement, but not least on the basis of what I felt to be an assurance by the Prime Minister that nobody would be sitting there without decommissioning going ahead. And the time scale envisaged, let's remember that was 2 years. 2 years passed, 3 years passed, 4 years passed, no substantial decommissioning. And I think there are a lot of people who felt that they'd been brought to the polling booth slightly under false pretenses. I have to say that. I think myself that's one reason. I mean, the people around this table will be glad that politics as they are, but I think that's part of the reason why you could argue that our politics were driven to the extreme. David Trimble goes into the executive on the basis, amongst other things, of these assurances. He's let down. People then say, oh, well, we need a harder man there than David Trimble. And politics swings out, if you like. Probably my colleagues around the table won't like this. So the more extreme wings of unionism and nationalism, now they've got to work together. Nobody would say that's impossible, but it's not easy. It's not going to be easy. People coming from such different standpoints, we began by talking about different principles about some very important things. So, I mean, Blair, I think, deserves full marks for achieving the degree of peace that we have now. Of course, the most important thing is that people aren't being killed all over the place, but we're at the beginning of a process of government, and whether that will work well or not, frankly, remains to be seen.
Albert Reynolds, how do you judge Tony Blair's legacy? Peace in Northern Ireland or war in Iraq?
Well, certainly when you look at peace in Northern Ireland, he gave it as much as anybody could expect him. He was with it all the way. He stayed with it. He compromised along the way. He had to accept things that he probably didn't agree to accept at the start, but felt that, first of all, the fighting had to stop. Life had to be defended in Northern Ireland, and he did anything that could be done to bring about peace, and I admire him for that. In relation to Iraq, it's a different story. I was sorry to see him get so close to the Americans in relation to Iraq that he got hauled into it, and I know how it happened and all of that because I was familiar with Iraq, but there were terrible mistakes made. I got a letter to deliver to the Foreign Affairs side in Washington from a number 2 in Foreign Affairs that said the greatest mistake they're after making stop it straight away, and that was to get rid of all the soldiers and the police and all off the borders. And that's where all these people came from. Nobody protecting the borders. You couldn't believe that anybody would make a mistake like that. But George Bush made that mistake, and I mean, it was late when he realised it, and everything got organised against him. So, in relation to full marks to him in relation to Northern Ireland, okay, we all make mistakes, and I think Iraq is one of his.
Jim Allister?
Whether his legacy is perceived historically to be Iraq or Northern Ireland, I'm not sure that history will judge him kindly, because Iraq is unravelling into incredible terror and horrendous daily diet of killing and mass murder. In Northern Ireland, his legacy to date was the premature delivery into government of an organisation which was still armed in the Republican movement, which went on, despite committing to the Mitchell Principles, to conduct Columbia, Castlereagh, the Northern Bank, all of those things we're familiar with, showing that his judgment was utterly flawed, along with those that went along with it. And now he is delivered as something not dissimilar, where again, prematurely, those of that ilk are to be delivered into government without giving up the apparatus of terrorism.
So we got it wrong on both fronts?
I think so.
Both in Northern Ireland and Iraq.
And epitomised in the indifferent and attitude to policing. So I think again he has been in such a rush and he has compelled others to be in such a rush, and some were eager to be in a rush, that he has produced a situation which will not be a lasting and telling legacy.
Okay. John O'Dowd?
Well, I'll remind Jim again that it wasn't Tony Blair who delivered us into government, it was the electorate. So that message might get through to him by October or November when he was going to, when Jim was going to bring us into power.
If the people of Iraq vote for the terrorists, then they're entitled to be in government, or the people of Palestine, they're entitled to be in government. Well, there has to be some democratic. There has to be some democratic restraint, and there have to be certain principles of democracy.
Yes, Jim, and we all know you're a very principled person.
And we all know just how much Sinn Féin think of democracy and principle.
So when your time frame was met in June, August, September, whenever it was, and you were going to bring us into government, would you be all right?
For bringing you into government.
So we've all established you're a very principled person.
I assure you.
So it is. In relation to Tony Blair, I believe locally his legacy will be the peace process here, but internationally he will be judged on his war and George Bush's war on the people of Iraq. Iraq is a human rights catastrophe. So it is. I believe it'll be a scar on society for possibly decades to come, because what the Western world in the frame of Tony Blair and George Bush, what they're delivering on the people of Iraq will take a long, long time to be forgiven.
Edwin?
I think in Iraq, it's easy to be critical in hindsight, but we should remember that the architect of Iraq's problems was Saddam Hussein. And genocide was taking place in Iraq for many, many years before what we see happening at the minute. In fact, thousands upon thousands of people were slaughtered by an evil, wicked dictator. And I'd have to say it's a good thing that that dictator has been disposed. But what is the problem that we have now is that we have terrorist insurgents actually creating problems. So in a sense, America and Britain can't get out of Iraq because of the terrorists. And yet they're saying that they're doing it because the Americans and British are there. So ultimately, the Iraqi people have to resolve this issue themselves in terms of, if they want to get rid of the Americans, if they want to get rid of the British quickly, then they have to stop doing the terrorist activity.
Philip, I want to bring you in. You asked the question. Do you have thoughts on Blair's legacy?
Yeah, I think he facilitated the people in Northern Ireland making the peace, because the people in Northern Ireland want an unstoppable peace process. But I think he's largely responsible for the violence in Iraq. Sadly, it's paid for by the taxes of people all over Britain who want peace.
Ken, did you want to come back in?
I mean, I think there's a very important and difficult principle at stake here, and it's the business of intervention in the affairs of another country. And my worry about it is that this is a selective intervention. I mean, Saddam Hussein, yes, a frightful tyrant, and the world is very well rid of him. On the other hand, one knows perfectly well that over many, many years, the American government was supporting extraordinarily corrupt and oppressive regimes, for instance, in Latin America. And because they were on the right side of the political argument, there was no question at all of intervening in their affairs. So I think we've got to be very, very cautious indeed about this notion that some country or some group of countries have a divine right to say we don't like the way that country is being run and we're going to go in there and change things. I'm very dubious about this whole business of regime change.
Would the audience be wholly opposed, for example? Would the audience be wholly opposed, for example, if the Americans and British were to seek to remove Robert Mugabe from Zimbabwe?
Well,
the war wasn't
it's
about
a very interesting point.
regime change. The world was told that America and Britain were going in there after weapons of mass destruction. They sat in the UN and they told the UN that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction and it was all a fabrication.
Okay,
it's well, nice to hear Sinn Féin moralise about weaponry.
Thank you.
Okay, let's not go back. Let's not go back on either of those two issues, if you don't mind, because I think we've explored to some extent both of them in full before. Are we all done on that one? Because I think we could open another can of worms. Let's just take a couple of very quick comments. Yeah, gentlemen.
You're talking about principles about going into government. You're about to go into an assembly with the PUP. You know, where's your principles there? They've got links to unionist paramilitaries who still have the weapons.
Okay, although not going into government with the PUP, obviously, because the PUP only have one representative at Stormont.
They're still going to...
Yeah. Edwin, do you speak to Don Purvis of the PUP?
I had my first meeting with Don Purvis some weeks ago, and I would...
Did you bring up the issue of paramilitary...
We would be seeking to encourage loyalist paramilitaries to disarm and disband. We want all paramilitaries to disarm and disband. And we feel that we're making progress in Northern Ireland on that particular front.
Okay.
There's more progress to be made, but loyalists need to disarm and disband as well.
Quick comment from a lady at the very back, and then I do want to move on. Yep.
Personally, I think that both situations are rather similar because we've got, in both countries, people who don't really want to speak to each other about the situation that's going on. So where the hands of history might have been on his shoulders for Northern Ireland, I think they're around his neck for Iraq.
All right. Okay. Let's take what I think might prove to be our last question. It's from Jennifer Anderson, who's a student from Dungannon. Jennifer.
In light of the recent royal breakup, do you think that England is still ruled by the class system?
Okay, interesting question. Kate Middleton, Prince William, gone their separate ways, as we know, dominating the tabloids. Sir Kenneth looks like he doesn't want to answer this, which is always a very good way of getting me to go to you, first of all.
Yeah. Well,
this is not...
I think
I
think some of the media commentary on this is absolutely disgusting. I think they're stirring up this whole class thing as a story. I mean, what credibility is to be attached to all this business about whether it's a toilet or a lavatory? What edifying material is this to get in the newspapers? I wish the media would leave the young couple alone. I mean, for goodness sake, I've been that age myself, believe it or not, years ago. And I expect to go through. I hope my wife isn't listening to this. I would have expected to go through 2 or 3 girlfriends. Of course, I didn't. But, I mean, that's reality. For goodness sake, will the newspapers leave them alone and stop this silly nonsense?
Edwin, have you followed this one very closely?
I just wish that people would let the young royals live their lives. And I think particularly Harry has come in for a lot of flack. And he's just a lad, and he's growing up, and he's a lot to learn. And I think that he'll turn out to be a very good young man. And I think William will turn out to be a very good young man. And I just wish the press and media would allow them to live their lives and get on with it.
Jim, how do you view it? Do you get caught up on whether it's a toilet or a lavatory?
Not particularly, but I do think there is a serious issue, and the serious issue is that this young couple's lives have been invaded beyond belief, as the mother of Prince William was. Really there is a young couple at the heart of this matter, and the media should find other ways to sell their tabloid press.
Except that people seem to want to read it. I mean, that's the bizarre thing.
Yes, but
a lot of it is absolute tat.
If you make that the yardstick, then there will be no standards in newspapers whatsoever.
Okay, what about the issue? What about the issue of snobbery, though? I mean, do you think that there is still inherently a clearly divided class system in? Well, the questioner says England, but in Britain.
I don't think it's as exaggerated as the media would seek to make it out. I have no doubt there are some people who view themselves as better than others and have no right or basis to do that. But I think generally there isn't the same prevalence of it as there was in the past, and it was never something to be very proud of.
Right. John O'Dowd, are you perplexed by an English class system?
Well, it may not come as no surprise to you, Mark, that I'm not a royal watcher. So I'm not, I can't fathom the stuff at all. However, in terms of a class system in England, I think there's clearly a system there where many in what was referred to as old money harken back to the days when they were the elite and where the ordinary working class people were kept in their place. So it is. But it's a matter for the English to correct.
So you're not that bothered?
Not that bothered.
Right.
Bothered.
Or hurt. All right. Albert Reynolds?
I think the best thing to say about education is that it's going to have a huge contribution to make to the development of Northern Ireland in the future. We have seen what education has done in relation to the development of the economy down south, and while the whole education is changing every place, it's a matter for Northern Ireland themselves as to what they require. But I would say education will deliver a better result here, and don't get hung up on small bits and pieces about class or otherwise, because we got rid of that, and I think we've been well rewarded for it.
So you want a meritocracy?
I'm not saying what I want.
Perhaps the new elite is politically correct.
Well, do you get that sense? Well, you're part of the new elite, Edwin.
No, I wouldn't be either politically correct or new elite.
Do you think?
And I think that there's too much political correctness that exists nowadays, and perhaps sometimes that needs to be confronted.
Didn't Alec Douglas Hume make the classic remark about all this years ago when Harold Wilson kept referring to him as the 14th Earl? And he said, well, when you think of it, he must be the 14th Mr. Wilson.
Yes, that's class system, I suppose, with a different spin. Jennifer, you asked the question. Have you really been following this very closely? Does it perplex you?
I've been disappointed by the media coverage because I think any member of the royal family should be able to marry whomever they choose, regardless of the class into which they're born.
Right. When you say media coverage, you say, of course, you're disappointed in the newspaper coverage rather than media coverage. We would wish to disassociate the electronic media from most of it, wouldn't we? Right. So you don't think they can? Well, of course, the someone who's in line to the throne can't marry a Catholic either. So that's another issue.
Yes.
But you don't want to get into that one. All right. No. Anybody else on this one? Yeah, gentleman over on my left. Yeah.
Is there a country in the world where there's not a class system of some form?
I don't know. Well, do you think we have a very active class system in Northern Ireland?
Of course there is. Everywhere in some form. I mean, look at the caste system in India.
Yes.
You know, it's nothing. It's unique to England.
But it's just particularly pronounced, some people might say, in England, because there are people who appear to be getting themselves into a terrible lather over what they call the small room in the house.
Probably some people in America would tell you it's pronounced there.
Well, maybe. Anybody else very quickly? Yeah, gentleman over on the right again.
Class system isn't so bad here now because we've even got Ian Paisley talking to Sinn Féin.
But is that anything to do with class?
Yeah.
Do you think it is to do with class?
Oh, yeah.
Because socially, all right, well, that's interesting. All right, well, that's an interesting note that either resolves it for a lot of people or confuses people even further. I'm not sure which. We'll leave it there at this stage. That's it from tonight's edition of Let's Talk. We'll be back next month. If you'd like tickets, by the way, to be in the audience for that programme, our number's on screen now. Meantime, don't forget about our website. You can log on to bbc.co.uk/Northern Ireland/Let's Talk and keep the debate going until next month. Thanks again to our panel and to our studio audience. Thanks to you at home for watching. From everyone in the Let's Talk team, good night.